Okay, so the video I'm making today, we're not working on any one machine. I'm kind of doing an in general thing. I see a lot of people asking about various problems their machine is having, and a lot of them sound like carburetor issues. And then they're getting bad advice that I'm seeing. Somebody saying, oh, hey, my machine did this and I replaced this, and the logic that they're using doesn't make sense to me. So this video, we're going to be working with carburetors. I have a whole tote of them behind me. I'll show off a couple different things. And just gives you the basics of how an ATV carburetor really works. It is kind of in general. They all work on the same basic principles here. They all have similar components that will look just a little bit differently, which is why I have my tote of them sitting here with me, so I can show you the different kinds. But you'll see that they use the same systems, they just look a little different, so that you can identify them. Yeah. This carburetor here is off of an old TW200. This is a Chinese knockoff that goes to a Honda three-wheeler. This is a Yamaha Warrior. That's a whole bunch of carburetors, and I'll just keep showing the different kinds. But ultimately, you're going to see, fuel has to go in. They have a pilot jet and a main jet, a throttle slide. Just so you can look at your own carburetors, even if they're not these exact ones, and still have a pretty decent idea of how it works. So let's get to the carburetors. Okay, so like I said, we have several different carburetors here. We'll set that one aside for now, and that one. We'll start with this. And there's a lot of pieces missing, but it's pretty easy to see into here. The main thing you want to do here is you have to essentially follow the fuel through the carburetor. That's this thing's whole job, is to get fuel into the engine. So you look at it and see where the fuel comes in. And if you look into these bowls here, it's never going to be the center, and it's usually this will be the main jet in the center. The pilot jet will be close to it. So that's what these two holes are for. But somewhere there's going to be a little hole like this near a couple little posts like that. And I'll show you on the other carburetor too. Basically, these little posts here, and you can't see the hole because the float's actually in the way. That hole is where fuel is going to come in. So you can kind of see various passages. A lot of the times, like stuff like this, if you look at the end, they drill these and then they put that in to seal it. But you have to figure out where fuel comes from for this, because the first thing it needs to do is get fuel into the carburetor. On this particular one, it's this spot right here. It's kind of hard to follow on the camera, but it comes through this thing straight down through this passage and into this spot here. Then it will fill the fuel bowl on the bottom there. So we'll get another one and kind of show that a little bit better. This is a very dirty carburetor, but it will work for the purpose we need. This here is called a float, and it does exactly what it suggests. Its job is to float. When the carb bowl fills up with the proper amount of gas, this floats in the gas, goes up, and it blocks off that hole. So it's just, when you're out of gas, it's good there, so it lets it come in. Till there, it shuts off the fuel flow. I'll pull one apart so that we can actually see. Okay, I did decide to just pull it out of this one. This little pin here slides out. Sometimes they're loose, sometimes they press in. But once that's out, this float will rise up. And with it comes that piece that just fell. The fuel needle. There we go. Sometimes they have a rubber tip. In fact, usually they have a rubber tip. Not always, though. That hooks on this little tab right here. Essentially, the little wire clip goes there. And it sits like that. So when it's full and this float rises up, it pivots here and it pushes this into the hole and stops the fuel from coming in. So that's how that system there works. There is a setting that you have to do for them when you put them together. Usually, let me pop this back in real quick. And I said real quick and then I dropped it. There is actually like a millimeter measurement here, but usually if you're holding it up level, which my camera's crooked so I can't hold it up level, But if you're holding it level, typically it sits so this is flat with the bottom. But that's not always true. Make sure you look that up for the machine that you're working with. So now we'll get that out of the way. But now you have fuel in the bowl that's down here, as long as that system is working right. The engine is over here. We have to get fuel to there. It sucks in air through here. Fuel and air have to come out of this, and it works essentially with suction. Because the engine is pumping air through this part here, the air moving through this tube creates suction around it. The best way to demonstrate that's a little 4th grade science experiment. You turn on your faucet and you get a little ping pong ball on a string, and when it gets close to the water, it'll actually suck the ball in. That's how it gets fuel from down here up into this tube. But then it has to do that through a couple of different things. Once again, in the center is going to be the main jet, and this little one next to it's the pilot jet. This carburetor is garbage, by the way. It's if you see if anybody who does know carburetors is watching and they see stuff wrong with it, I know that's JB Weld. But it works great for experience here. This here is the main jet for it. That just unscrews. This tube here, like I said, it's JB welded into this one, but it will go pretty much, yay far or so down into there. Usually it has little tiny holes in the side, and those all have to be clear. We'll pop out this pilot jet next. As soon as I can, there we go. Always make sure you have the appropriate size screwdriver. These are all brass and they will strip very easily. I actually end up with several screwdrivers that I've modified so my edges are flat, just so I can get the largest size that I can down into the tubes. Unscrew it, pull it out of there. This is the pilot jet. You can see it has those holes on the side down there, has the threads, and then I'm sure you can't see through it, but you can at least see that there is a hole there. So this will have to have flow all the way straight through it and in those holes there. Now that comes to what the carburetor has to do depending on your input. Essentially, that little tiny jet that I pulled out, the pilot jet, controls idle and very low throttle position, usually only up to about a quarter. That's give or take. It's not exactly 100% quarter throttle. But that only controls up to there. Well, once you're past that, I mean, it might be dribbling a little trickle of fuel past, but nothing that's actually worthy of being in consideration there. It's pretty much, if you have a problem up top or mid-range, it's not this. This is idle and just barely on the throttle. The main jet itself, in this middle tube here, really only controls like the top quarter, like 3/4 to full throttle. But it also has, it helps out with a lot of the mid-range as well. And then for the next part, let me grab a fourth carburetor. Yeah. You have this here. I believe they refer to it as the metering rod typically. But it runs inside of this tube here down to the main jet. Actually, this carburetor is filthy, but you can see it in there. That's what that is. This carburetor is broken, so I don't even know if I can open the throttle. Well, I guess, yeah, the throttle's already open. But that rod is moving with that. And that rod is controlling pretty much all of your mid-range. It's working with the main jet because all the fuel that goes past this is going through the main jet. So if you had a really super way undersized main jet, it wouldn't be able to do this. But the taper on here does matter. It's just the farther you pull this out as you're actuating your throttle, the more fuel that it lets through. Then once you're at full throttle, this is way backed out. And then it's 100% the hole in this main jet that's actually controlling it. So set that stuff aside there. There are several different styles of jets. Oh, actually, here's a good example. The main jet that I showed you, I said it goes in that little tube that usually has holes in it. And that's what this right here is. This particular one is out of a 400EX. They have this little nut thing on it. But all those holes there have to be clear because it lets air mix with the fuel. Because liquid fuel itself doesn't burn. It's pretty much, it almost has, it pretty much has to vaporize before it really gives you any power. So there's going to be a large hole through that. Mine has the jet still in it, but the entire diameter of that tube is actually what's doing it. So that's what that looks like. But then there's lots of different styles of main jet. These ones here you'll typically see in like a Honda. I think some Kawasaki's, I could be wrong. And pardon me if I pronounce this differently than you, but either Kihin or Kaihin. I've even heard Kaihin. I usually say Kaihin, but let's see. But those carburetors, a lot of times will have a jet that looks like this. Sometimes they'll have a jet that looks like this. And then there's Mikuni's will have a jet that looks like this. It's a lot like that first one I showed you, but it's a lot shorter. And there's lots of different styles, but as long as you know where they are in the carburetor, you'll know which one is which. And the same goes for pilot jets. You get a whole bunch of those out. I would argue that those vary more. I mean, why won't you zoom? There you go. You can see the different styles. That one's short with no holes, longer with holes, short with no holes, short with holes. Lots of different styles there. So if it has the holes, they have to be clean. They will all have a hole going straight through it in this direction right here. That does have to be clear. If it's not, you'll have either no start or very hard start. Either a no start or a very hard start, or sometimes it will affect a little bit of you when you first take off on the throttle, but it's usually not what's doing that. If you have a problem with that, it's probably elsewhere. They also have something, the pilot adjusting needle, and it will look something like this. It varies by vehicle. And where that's located determines exactly what it does. But essentially, it does have the same function, and that's to control the air-fuel ratio while that pilot's jet is in working. It doesn't matter up high. So let's see here. On this carburetor, it's right here on the engine side. Most 4-strokes have it on the engine side. Most 2-strokes have it on the intakes, or like the air filter side. And there is usually an initial setting for these you can look up. And that's just, if you tighten it down, I should probably be counting these, but I'm not. Okay, you tighten it down real lightly until it bottoms, and then they'll tell you like, 2 1/4 turns or something for it. So then you back it out that much. So it'd be half, 1, 1.5, 2 1/4, and that would be the initial setting. And then if it's on the engine side of this, loosening it would give it more gas. Tightening, of course, would be the opposite. If it's on this side of everything, it's letting in only air through little holes like this one here. So by tightening it, you would block air and cause more fuel at that point. But we're mostly dealing with 4-strokes today in this description. So we're going to focus on this one here. If it was running real lean at idle, which is usually indicated by like a hiccup or a pop, if it backfires, it comes through the intake. So you would back that out just a little bit. I'd say, 1/8 of a turn, maybe 1/4. Then let it run for a sec, see how it acts. You always do want to pause a little bit every time you adjust it, just to kind of let everything work itself out. That is most of how it works. So now, I'm going to pull this one here apart. And I'm going to hope that I left everything inside of it so that it's easier to explain, because I can't guarantee that I did. One of the screws is loose. That's a pretty good indicator. I probably already took something out, but we'll see.
Carburetor.
Okay, so there's the gasket. Usually a lot of sediment will be in here on a dirty carb. I don't think this carburetor has ever even been used, so it's pretty clean. Make sure the gasket's soft. There's a good chance you'll need a new one. So then, a lot of times they'll have these little plastic things here. It's a little like fuel baffle. It will still run without that, but they did put it there for a reason. It should be there. So then we have the main jet up here. It's a little farther this time, but the pilot jet's hiding in there. I already showed you the pilot circuit there. If I was to knock this pin out that way or this way, then I could remove the float and you could get to the fuel needle. I'm not going to, because this one is working just fine. And this is actually a good example of what I said, how not all carburetors are perfectly level. See, this one here looks like it's up, not level with this, but it's going with the entire carb. If I was to sit this flat right on the bench right now, that's level, which actually it's adjusted just a hair low. So if I couldn't start this bike, it was having some trouble, maybe I sprayed some carb clean or brake clean or something into the intake, and I got the engine to just pop off for a second and then nothing, there's two things I would check. The first is this fuel needle here. Just make sure it's moving. You can follow it, of course, to see where fuel comes in, which is right here. Try blowing air through that. If it comes out there and the float is adjusted at the right height, then you know fuel is getting into the carb. If it does that and it's still having a hard time starting or not starting, then it would be a matter of the pilot jet, because that controls everything up to roughly quarter throttle. If it starts in idles but won't actually, well, we'll say if it starts in idles, then you get on it, you take off down the road, and you're getting pretty close to wide open. It starts popping or backfiring or just bogging out, something like that. Then you'd be looking more at this main. If you're, I guess really in most of the cases here, if you're somewhere in the mid-range, I don't know, you're second gear, quarter, maybe third throttle or something like that, and it's just not running right. Like it's running maybe not as smooth as it could be, because a 4-stroke really should most of the time run smooth throughout the entire RPM range. 2-strokes get a little funky just because of the way that they're built, which I'm not really going to go into in this video. But instead of just brrr, it's kind of, it doesn't, the mixture isn't completely correct. And that will have to do with this needle. They're not typically dirty, but they have this little clip right up here. I've seen it before where that clip actually just falls off and drops the needle in, and then it plugs off that main jet completely. And when you open up the throttle, let's see here. See if I can just do this one. There we go. If I open up the throttle, that needle would still be just sitting down into there, blocking off all fuel, but now this tube is letting through nothing but air. So it's not going to be able to pull enough fuel, and you'll pretty much die anywhere off of, pretty much anywhere that you're giving it throttle at that point. But also, if it's running pretty decent, but just not quite smooth, you may have to adjust the position of this needle. That I can't seem to get the zoom now. There we go. If you move this needle up, because this needle is kind of what it rests on in the carb. So if you move it up, the needle sits down a little bit farther at all times. It still goes through its same range of motion, but since it's a little bit farther down, it blocks more fuel. So by moving this clip up, you're giving it less fuel in the mid-range, and by moving it down, you're giving it more. Okay, this carburetor also has another function, the accelerator pump. And behind here, you can see that it would hook to the throttle linkage. I don't really think I need to. I don't like, kind of do wish I could. There we go. If I open the throttle, you can see that that's moving that little bit. And what that's for is if you're at idle and you stab the throttle real quickly, it has to switch from the very small circuit that is the pilot jet to the main jet, or to the needle and main jet real quick. And usually it can't quite keep up with that. So the accelerator pump's job is to give it just a little extra burst of fuel to keep the engine running as well as possible until the other circuits are able to catch up to it. Not every carburetor is going to have that. Seems like the newer you get, well, newer you get now, they're fuel injected, but the newer carburetors seem to come with that more and more because it is definitely a good idea. So, probably not actually going to pull any of these jets out. They don't really need to. Kind of explained what it is that they do. So, we'll set that aside. Pull this out here too. Okay, this is the throttle slide. That needle just kind of sits there. Then there's different ways that they do this too. In this particular thing, there's this little flat plate that goes up on top, kind of sits there, and the spring pushes it. So now that needle can't actually move. It's pretty unlikely that that clip would come off in this system, but it could happen. It's always worth inspecting, especially if your carburetor is already sitting up here in a part. But this moves as a unit, lifts up. Normally you could just see that through the body. If I had a cable on that, I would just put it in there, but it would literally be blocking this entire thing. Then as you give it throttle above idle, it will open everything up kind of like that. And full throttle somewhere up here. Lots of gas can get past this needle and through the main jet up into there. But as you're there, you're pretty much blocked off on that main jet. So it's sucking from the pilot jet. The pilot jet will usually have a hole. This one's actually got a pretty decent size. You can kind of see it in there. See if I can point at it. Get some light in there. There's a hole right here. Usually there's a couple. There's one right here and right here. They're going to be very small holes, but that's what those are. Another thing that's worth mentioning is the choke. And there's a couple different styles of that too. It's just, first thing in the morning, you got a cold engine or whatever, you might need a little bit more fuel to run it. On older styles, like this one here, the choke was literally that. It would block off this. As you remember, the engine is trying to suck air through that. By blocking this off, it's creating some really high vacuum in this main part here, which will suck a lot more through these down here. So that was a pretty basic system. Nothing really exciting going on with that one. Then newer carburetors started going to this style here. Still called a choke, but really it's like an enricher jet. When you move it, it opens up another passage. So it's not actually blocking the air from coming in. It's just letting, in fact, most cases, it's letting more fuel and air in through here. So just giving it much more fuel to burn. So that's basically what I'm going to do for this video. Here is just, it's kind of the oversight. They're always going to have some sort of thing that controls the high and the low. That mid-range there is different. Any carburetor that you look into, it's going to look a little bit different, but they're going to operate basically the same. You can kind of see the differences on these ones here. So fuel is definitely still coming in here. The main jet still goes here. Pilot jet still goes there. This one has the pilot screw right in front of it. This one is actually for a 2-stroke. So this one has that pilot on the air filter side. Remember I was talking about those earlier. It's blocking off this hole right here or opening it up. If I tighten this screw all the way in until it seats, it completely shuts that hole off. It can't suck any air in there to mix with the pilot, so it's going to suck more fuel that way. Okay, so I believe I've given a pretty decent description here. If not, feel free to leave comments there asking me any questions. I should be able to answer it. Might even film a quick little video about it. And as always, if you like the video, like and subscribe. We'll see you next time.